PJ Scott here with another edition of Veterans Forum, and we have three gentlemen here who actually went to the Korean Peninsula during the 1950s. Yes, we're going to be talking about the Korean War. Did you know that 1.8 million men served in the Korean theater from 1950 to 53? Wow, that's a lot of folks. Now, you can look up on your net and you get different statistics. So I'm not saying these are completely accurate, but you can look it up for yourself. There was 36,940 battle dead, 3,275 died of unrelated events to battle. And I think we're going to talk today a little bit about how cold Korea can get. So I suspect some of those poor guys probably passed away due to the cold. Now, why would I have an interest in the Korean War? I would not be here if it had not been for the Korean War. This Santa Cruz man from California, my dad, joined the Marines in 1948 and was stationed in Virginia, where he met my lovely mother. So I am the result of the Korean War, in a sense. Now let's introduce our guests. I have Dick Burkholder, Army, right, Dick?
Yes, Army.
And then I have Birger, am I saying your name correct? Sather, also Army.
Army.
And then I have Robert Medley, who, like my dad, is a Marine. Thank you for joining us all. Now, we want to get started in finding out when you went in and what kind of action you saw. And we're going to discuss the MIA issue. There was an awful lot of missing in action military men during the Korean War. Now, before we get started, the Korean War started on the 27th of June in 1950. The hostilities ended the 27th of July, 1953. However, because it was such an uneasy peace, Department of Defense officially says that that ended the 31st of January, 1955. So however you cut it, we're talking about the early 1950s. Robert, I had the impression before the show that you might have actually went to Korea before our other two gentlemen. Can you tell us when you went into the Marines and when you set foot in Korea?
Well, I went in the Marines September the 7th, 1950. And I went to the, after boot camp at Paris Island, went to Brooklyn Navy Yard for a while. And then I was on the 14th replacement draft. We took out training at Camp Pendleton.
So you went in September of 50, and the war had actually started in July. So you kind of knew what you were getting into, didn't you?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, the 14th replacement draft got to Korea in November of 1951. And they were, the sergeant, there's a sergeant major on the ship that assigned everybody alphabetically.
Oh, I see.
To units, so it didn't matter what your prior training was, you went alphabetically. So I wound up in 1st Motor Battalion. And when we got off the landing craft and went up to a tent where they were serving steak and coffee, said after you have your food, then we'll assign you to companies. So I immediately, after he finished speaking, I went to the major and said, I was in the Army paratroopers. I'm an infantryman, and I want to go to an infantry regiment.
Oh, so you were an Army paratrooper, and then you joined the Marines? How did that work out?
Well, I missed World War II, just barely. So I, in fact, when they dropped the atomic bomb, I went down the next day and told the draft board I was 18. I had a miraculous increase.
And then when did you actually get into Korea? Do you remember the date?
Well, it was, it's on my discharge paper here, but it was, I think, about November 6th.
Of 1950?
51.
Okay, Birger, what's your history? When did you enlist and when did you get to Korea?
Okay, I was drafted. I did not enlist in December of 1950. Went through the infantry basic training at Fort Riley, Kansas, and immediately shipped over to, went to Japan, and there was about a half a dozen of our group, our company, that were picked to go to artillery training after we had gone through all this infantry basic. So I spent a month in Japan, and from there I ended up in Korea in July of 1951.
And was it really hot and humid in July?
It was the beginning of the rainy season.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So you got
They have a
soaked.
about a 6-week rainy season, and it rains, and it was hot, you know, and muggy during that part of the year, but then when you get later into the fall, you know, you get to a drier climate.
Now, what were you trained for, particularly in the Army? I mean, were you just infantrymen and you were just going to shoot? Or, I mean, what was your...
Basic infantry, yes.
Okay.
But I didn't get to use my training because I was transferred to an artillery unit
Well, that happens frequently in the military, doesn't it? Now,
and,
now, Dick, let's get to you. When did you join the Army, and when did you find yourself in Korea?
Well, I was inducted in September of 1951. I went to Camp Roberts for basic infantry training. From there to Fort Bliss, Texas for anti-aircraft artillery training. From there, I went to Aberdeen Proving Ground, where I attended the Officer Candidate School.
Okay. Now, before we get into a lot of personal history, the wannabe teacher in me, I do have a huge atlas here of Korea. And Dick is going to show us, because that all-important parallel line, are you able to see that?
Yes.
The 38th parallel. Can you point that out to the audience there? Now, it's my understanding, and if you men understand differently, please jump in, that somewhere in 1948, North and South Korea established different kinds of governments. And the reason the war was started in June of 1950 was that the North Koreans invaded Seoul. You see Seoul on the map there.
Seoul is right here.
Which is clearly in the south. And that is how the Korean War got started. Any comments, any further comments about why the Korean War got started? Because you gentlemen were there. I'm reading it out of a history book.
38th parallel cuts across right in this area, and that was the division between North and South Korea. It was a political agreement with Russia that Korea would be separated if the Russians would come into the war against Japan. At that point, we weren't sure that it could be handled with not too great a loss of life. So the United States, asked that Russia join us. And they had influence over Manchuria and North Korea.
Okay.
And this is what started the whole thing.
Well, before I put the map down, so Robert, what side of the parallel line, before we take the map down, did you see action with the Marines?
Well, I wanted to make it clear that I had by then gotten into Charlie Company, 7th Marines. And we were north of the 38th parallel, not far from the Sea of Japan. I think it is there.
And Birger, what about you in the Army? Whereabouts were you?
My original location was north of Chuncheon, and I don't know if you can see Chuncheon on that map.
It was over here on the west side, right?
Towards the central part, actually, somewhere.
Okay.
And we spent that first winter over in the eastern part of the country, which is the mountainous areas.
Which was really cold and windy,
And
right?
it was cold, snow, 20 below zero.
Yeah.
And
I'm
we
convinced
did-
in talking to Korean War veterans there was no place colder on the planet. I have an uncle who fought the Nazis in Germany, and he talked for years about how cold that was until he got called up to go to Korea. Yeah, bad news. And people did, I mean, we kind of snicker, we really shouldn't. It's not a funny situation. Men did die because it was so cold. It was so cold.
And we moved around a lot, being with the artillery units. So we spent the beginning over on the eastern part of the country, and we moved and to the central, and we actually moved all the way over to the western part of the Korean
And what
Peninsula.
general were you fighting under at the time? Do you remember? I know MacArthur was sort of running the show, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. Where, do you remember who your
Ridgway, General
Was it
Ridgway.
Oh, okay.
General Ridgway? Okay.
Okay.
The
Well,
name
you all were
escapes
there.
me.
I'm asking the question now, Dick.
Yeah.
Where were you in Korea?
Well, we were north of Seoul, above the 38th parallel, and north of Uijeonbu. Anyone who's watched the television show MASH is familiar with Uijeonbu.
Right.
But
The thing you can say about MASH is it ceased to be the forgotten war. Hey guys, it ceased to be the forgotten war. That's about one good thing you can say about MASH. So
when I got there, we were jockeying for position because the peace talks had been going on for some time, and each side was determined to establish the best defensive ground they could find. So
Right.
we were fighting back and forth over this this defensive ground.
Now here's a picture of Dick here, and I understand. Okay, where was this picture taken?
That was north of Uijeonbu.
Okay, and then this picture is kind of a, I hope we can get it. I'll try to hold it still for the camera. You are wearing a what kind of beret? You want to explain that?
Well, under the United Nations forces, we had a number of units from other countries. I was visiting the Dutch battalion at the
okay.
time. This was before the United States ever adopted the beret as
Right.
a military headgear, and I was wearing the beret of one of the individuals who was a member of that organization, but it was. The Americans were so interested in picking things like that up as souvenirs. Any Dutch that lost his beret was fined.
Oh, I see.
He was
Okay.
harshly treated.
Oh, okay. So we won't go any further on that. That sounds like somebody got it.
I returned it. I didn't.
Okay, good PR. Burger, let's see some of your pictures. One or two of them. What do you have there?
I have this one picture is in front of our artillery, the 155 howitzer, and it shows the camouflage we have over the gun position and out there. And this was during the summer part of the season, and this was a picture of I'm in the middle of our. When the big thing, of course, in Korea was rotation. It was pretty popular.
Right.
You spent so much time over there, and you would be rotated.
I think you need to be. I mean, you need
Yes.
some R&R.
Yes.
Now, what about you, Robert? Don't you have a lovely picture of you and your wife?
Yes, this was taken just before I went to Korea on the 14th replacement draft.
Wow.
My wife and I.
Uh-huh.
We'd
Very
been-
nice.
We'd been married.
Now,
for-
did you take the Marine Corps as a career? Did you spend 20 years
No,
in
I
the Marine?
didn't. I was in the Army 3, Marines about 4, and the National Guard and Reserves for 20 years.
Okay. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier is I went to a Memorial Day event a number of years ago in California, and they had listed on this brochure of the war, dead and casualties and MIAs from the Revolutionary War to current, and I was really shocked at the number of MIAs when, yes, we had, what did I quote, 1.8 million in the Korean theater during that time, but that certainly isn't the numbers of men that was in World War I or World War II, and certainly nothing can beat our Civil War because both sides were American. We had, if I may say, a hell of a lot of casualties during the Korean conflict. I'd like to have each one of you gentlemen give me your take on that. Why? Dick, let's start with you.
I have a theory on why we have been unable to locate and identify missing in action. To begin with, when the war began, the United States was at peace,
Right.
and we had demobilized from World War II. We had a very small advisory group operating in Korea, trying to develop a defense force for the South Koreans. However, as they moved down across the 38th parallel, they moved at an extremely rapid rate.
Right, right.
When President Truman decided that American combat forces would be used in Korea, they were deployed piecemeal. As they could get a unit together in the area, they would be deployed into combat.
Uh-huh.
So many of these people were captured and lost during that period because we weren't really organized. And my theory is that because we had a political agreement to end the combat, it wasn't like World War II where we could hold the Koreans accountable for our missing in action.
Right, right.
And therefore, they didn't volunteer anything, and those people probably are still missing in action. They haven't been heard from.
Well, I looked at a couple of sites on the net that the MIA's figures change as they find bodies, but I can't think there's many mothers left who lost sons in the Korean War that this would be any comfort to her now. She's probably gone to her reward as well. Birger, what's your take on the MIA situation over there?
Well, I think the majority of the prisoners that were taken was at the beginning of the war.
Mm-hmm.
When
so you think a lot of them were prisoners of war and then became MIA? Is that?
Well, I think
I'm sure there
there's
must
a
have been
certain,
some.
well, there's definitely, presently I think there's over 1,100 from the Korean War
Mm-hmm.
that are still missing MIAs. And
Now I had a research librarian look it up, and she told me that there's 5,178 MIAs and POWs still missing, and she was quoting some Department of Defense thing. I want to thank Carolyn Neal with the research for looking at that. However, website I went to had 4,793. So clearly those figures kind of vary. Nonetheless, it's still a lot of missing.
that's a lot of numbers.
Right.
Then when the Chinese entered, China entered the war, I think this was where the armed forces, our forces had to retreat that first winter. There were many of them that were missing and unaccounted for.
Now, Robert, what's your take on the MIA situation?
Well, of course, the Frozen Chosen is a kind of a epic in the Marine Corps history.
Yes.
And this occurred a year before I got there. But
Mm-hmm.
but when the 1st Marine Division went up almost the Yalu and also the 2nd 2nd Army Division and the 7th Division. They were all up north, way up north. And then the Chinese began to come through. I think initially there was 200,000. And then when they finally got the orders to retreat, General Allman, who was in charge of the 8th Army at that time, advised the Marines general to break up into small teams and escape the best way they could.
Right.
And the Marine general said, no, we're going out as Marines or we're not going out. Retreat, hell, we're advancing in another direction.
Right.
And they did bring out most of their bodies. But the Army divisions, they lost a lot of the people that were killed or froze to death were not recovered. And that accounts for the great majority of the missing in action.
Well, you know, Vietnam, we had a case where there was a lot of publicity about MIAs and POWs, and so I don't know why during the Korean War because I asked my mom, she didn't remember any media about outrage about the MIA issue at all. So that was just a different time. Well, gentlemen, we're going to have to do a part 2 and find out what kind of combat y'all saw, but we've run out of time. That half hour went really fast with 3 handsome guys. It just goes by real quick. I want to thank each one of you for serving our country during war, and God bless you. We're still at war. I encourage you to pray for wisdom for our leaders to have a speedy end to the war in Iraq. And you each know how to pray. I don't have to tell you. Catch us next time on Veterans Forum. Thank you for joining us.